Today talk about a very cool manga. It's called The Celestial Demon. He can't lead a normal life. The story begins by showing us a blacksmith, which was very famous and recognized since his work was above average, and one day he was lucky enough to be able to sell his weapons and artifacts to the same kingdom in which he was born. His work was so recognized and of excellent quality that the king decided to grant him the title of male, and we finish how the blacksmith of that time is the owner of the land where we are. We change dinners and we see how a boy is talking to an older person. In this case, this boy is our protagonist, which is called in this case. We know how behind them approaches another man who questions why he is asking those questions, since he must know that story. And we see how a few hours ago in the past, our protagonist wakes up and asks if he was the eldest son of the family Dimitri, thus revealing to us the surname of his family, asking the man from before if this was the kingdom of Cairo that was on the continent, and if there was no world known as Mun in this place, to which the man replies that yes, he was right, there was no world of the Morin and it was the Salamander continent. The man, a little confused, questions if the protagonist was really well or if perhaps he was affected under some kind of hallucinogen, which was very famous lately in the youth of the nobility, to then mention to the protagonist that the lady of the house La Valence was visiting, which was none other than the fiancée of our protagonist. The man again thinks to himself that, unlike his brothers, the protagonist spent the last 25 years of his life doing absolutely nothing, wasting time, and considered as well as the disgrace of them. That even so, all have begun to call him as Dimitri Jerk. Again, the assistant mentions that Miss Law is a woman who values above all manners and elegance, so he should prepare to meet with this one, to which the prot interrupts him and mentions that there are more important things to attend to at the moment, and these were to call the oldest person in, to know a little more about this new world and the history of the territory where he was. These words end up confusing the servant, but he, likewise, has no other choice but to listen to what the protagonist asks him already in the present. The old woman mentions that it will be all the history she knew until today of the Dimitri territory. After this, we see the past life of the protagonist, in which he was called Bio Junji, and this was the most powerful person in the whole world of Morin, because in his past life full of suffering and tragedy, he did everything possible to achieve each of his goals, and when he died, he was very confused and wondered why he woke up in the body of the Morin. Why he woke up in the body of Roma Dimi. Perhaps it is a punishment from the gods for not having accepted the ascension of this same. Not far from where he is starring as a group of bandits was beating a boy. Remember this boy, as he is important for the future, to which the protagonist approaches them and they ask him to stop. But the bandits insult the protagonist and ask him to stay away and succumbent in their affairs. The bow servant, upon seeing them, realizes that they are part of a gang known as Bloodfangs, a group of bandits who even rival and are feared by the same, to which the protagonist suddenly calls his servant. He asks him what were the laws and actions he should take in this case. The servant replies that the boy did wrong by not paying the debt he owed to the bandits, but this they could not do anything directly, as there were legal actions to be taken, and even worse, they disrespected the eldest son of the baron of the house, where the servant says that these crimes should be paid for with his life, as it was a disgrace to his entire family. The prot, hearing this, picks up a branch that was on the ground and states that he will be the one to punish them with his own hands, running in affront to the bandits and in the process piercing the throat of one of the bandits who was distracted by what was happening. Another of the bandits, seeing what was happening, he lunges, attacking the protagonist, but the latter effectively dodges him and pierces his entire torso with his arm, leaving everyone surprised, but even more so his servant, as he thought he was not the one he had known all his life, questioning whether this was truly the boy he had seen growing up. We travel back in time again and see how the protagonist, he finds himself lying on the floor, getting up and opening his eyes for the first time in the body of Roma, finding many bottles of liquor and a note which looked like his will. And last words, we see how Roman, the former Roma, was a coward whose will stated that he had committed suicide to avoid attending the compulsory service, since he had no hope of marrying the lady of the house. The protagonist, after analyzing the situation, he realizes that the previous owner of that body was a complete coward who was not responsible for his actions. But leaving everything aside, the protagonist mentions that currently in that body was Ben Junju, the of the sect of celestial demons. We return to the present and see how the protagonist had already finished off almost all the bandits he encountered, and we see how one of them tried to escape and is captured by him. He says that he will not kill him, but that he will still be severely punished, cutting out what seems to be his eyes and leaving his inert body on the floor. The bow. All file. Fa Chirito stands in front of the whole crowd that was watching and tells them that if any of them was dissatisfied with what he had done to go and look for him. whenever he wanted. In this we are shown a memory of the protagonist in which we see him at the top and the pinnacle of the power of the world. And we see how all those who tried to confront the protagonist ended up succumbing to the power of this, seeing an incredible scene where the pro was standing on a pile of corpses. And underneath this one I saw an incredibly large river of blood. Returning to the present, we see how the pro thinks to himself that no matter what time to where he is everywhere, there were rats and that they had to be taken care of as soon as possible. Referring to the bandits in this, we see how the prot asks his servant, who is called, that he take charge of informing the guards what had happened. After this, we see how the prot staying alone thinks to himself that the state of that body was terrible, that it lacked energy from here and that the flow of it was very bad, adding that he had to gather information to improve his skeleton. Referring to the power of the storage in his body to obtain more power in this way, he is interrupted by the boy from before who thanks him for having helped him for the pro. He mentions that he did not help him and that he had only done it to get rid of the bandits, asking him for an explanation as to why they had beaten him because they treated him that way, to which the boy mentions that his parents had previously asked him for a loan, this band of criminals, which they agreed to, and his father promised them to pay all the debt once the harvest was crops. But the bandits had another plan in mind, and is that these damaged the crops so that they could not harvest anything of what they had planted, with the intention and objective of staying with the younger sister of the boy, as it had been his adjective from the beginning. In that the boy came closer to the protagonist and begs him to help him save his sister, to which the protagonist looks at him carefully and makes him remember one of his rivals in the world of them, which had by name the Mad Demon, which was one of the 4 celestial kings, who had a power almost equal to that of the protagonist at that time. At this point we see how the pro becomes even more interested in the boy by asking about his name, which reveals that his name is K. The pro decides to withdraw, but thinks that in the future he will have many more relationships with this boy. In a scene change, we see how the protagonist's fiancée, the lady of the house, laughs. She is arriving in the city, in that we see a memory of the girl, which from a month ago, in which she was talking to her father, the head of the family, who mentions to her that her marriage was arranged and it was with the protagonist's family. She was complaining, as she did not want to live in a territory full of miners and sweaty men full of dirt, to which the father, hearing the words of his daughter, apologizes and tells her that he had no more, and that this was the only thing they had left to do to save their territory. We return to the present and see how Miss Law was arriving at the mansion and thinks she had to marry the second son of the house, but this suddenly changed as Roman demanded her father, who wanted to be the one to marry her. A last-minute change that left her completely surprised, and at the same time she reproached herself for what her family had to resort to in order to save her prestige. As Miss Law trots along, she mentions to him that they should break off their marriage and leave things there and then. She was not comfortable with the decision they were making, to which the protagonist replies that it was okay, that he would be responsible for everything that happened from now on. Regarding the breakup, the girl is completely shocked, to which the protagonist gets on the floor and mentions to her that marrying him would be a great loss for, and a very annoying burden. But we see how this was all part of the protagonist's plan, leaving Miss Law even more confused than she already knows. Before the protagonist walks away, but if before mentioning that he would be charged her father on the subject of the breakup of the marriage, we switch dinners and see how the protagonist is in his father's room talking to his father, to which he mentions to him that he would no longer have gone back on the breakup of his marriage. His father, hearing this, he gets even more upset and mentions to him that he had done everything to change the public opinion about the protagonist and thus also prolong or postpone his mandatory conscription. But the latter mentions to him that, since the marriage was cancelled, you should attend the service. In about 6 months, he also mentions what happened with the Bloodfang, mentioning that perhaps it was not the prot who took care of it, but that he had helped, since his father did not believe him capable of doing anything similar, since he was considered the weakest among the weak. His father again mentions to him that he would not have any charge to do with this and that he would not help him or offer him any kind of help, waiting for the protagonist to kneel down, beg for mercy. But the latter feels and tells him that it was okay, that he would follow his father's wishes, going on to withdraw from the room, leaving the room. We see how Miss Flora, which is the name of the lady, was waiting for him and tells him to return quickly to his father and asks for help to deal with the group of Bloodfangs, as they were not afraid to openly attack him. We switch scenes a few hours earlier and see how the protagonist was getting ready to meet Flora, but the servant tells him that he should hurry so as not to keep him waiting, to which the protagonist thinks that he should undo the marriage as soon as possible, without offending Flora in this case. Then we come back to the present and we would see how the protagonist regrets having taken her into consideration, as she doesn't show him the slightest bit of respect. Then the pro goes on to mention that she is arrogant and of not considering the protagonist's circumstance. He tells her that she had no right to interrupt him in his decision, telling her that from that moment on, they would go their separate ways, and leaving Flora in shock, who stares at them while he leaves. In the evening of that same day, we see how the father of the protagonist was drinking and his mother next to him, which is called lie, trying to ask him to stop to not overdo it with alcohol, to which the father of the protagonist mentions that he again used aggression against his son, commenting that when they were commoners, he beat the protagonist very often, and when the latter got his male title, he promised never to do it again, to which her husband commented that this made their other children grow up without any problems. But the pro's father was still pensive. He says that the only son who lived in poverty alongside him, it was the protagonist living towards his side. Many difficult moments, to which her husband tries to encourage him, telling him that as a father, he would not let any of his children take wrong directions. And the latter happens to change the subject of the conversation by mentioning the blood fang. And the protagonist's mother suggests who I saw in Captain Jonathan to help him. And so, the protagonist's father takes action and sends for the captain quickly. The next day, we see how Hand is running after him, telling him that he was dangerous and that, how could he think of going out, since he was being followed by the Blood Fang group, to which the pro mentions that he shouldn't worry. He keeps on walking, arriving at a restaurant where the pro buys a lot of food for Hand and tells him that he will leave first, to continue investigating without first mentioning to him that it was too dangerous for Hand to be accompanying him. The latter refuses, telling him that it was his responsibility to accompany the protagonist everywhere, but the latter tells him that it's okay. He had done enough and was waiting for him at the restaurant. Then we see how the pro was walking down a street, thinking that he had been sufficiently flashy to catch the attention of the bandits, since these always went around in small groups and were hard to track, he said, so it was the perfect day since the security was less that day. Because all the guards were training, entering a Juan, we took as 3 bandits were following him. But at that very moment, we change dinner and see how they have come running to where Captain Jonathan is and tells him that the protagonist was in serious trouble. We return to the protagonist and see how he stops one of the bandits and punches him in the stomach and then takes his knife and stabs him in the throat. The other 2 bandits can't believe what they just saw. They say that this was not what they had heard from the protagonist, as he was much stronger than the rumors said. We return to where he was, Hand with the guards, and see how this one tells the guards that the protagonist left without any escort, to which the guards and the captain look at each other and in saying that the pro being the weakest among the weakest, he set out to pick a fight by his own means, to which Hand, very upset, tells him and reproaches him that he should not have to be met unless in a situation like this. Captain Jonathan, remembering what the bowman's father asked him to do a few nights ago, asks his men to get ready immediately and asks Hand to take him to the place where he met the PR last time. We go back again, where the protagonist is with the bandits, and we see how these other 2 that remain see how one of their companions find on the floor without possibility to get up to what, seeing this provokes them so that these attack immediately getting. So one of the bandits launches into the attack and the protagonist very calmly dodges the attack of the bandit to stick his knife in the side of the same, while in the act is to the other of a kick in the stomach. And approaching the latter, you ask him if they were the only ones in this. That the bandit answers yes, to which the protoko, a very serious expression, tells him to answer all his questions and lie to him while I stick a knife in his leg to then ask this one who was his boss. Changing scene. We see how the protagonist was arriving a boat in all his clothes full of blood and sits at the bar while talking to the bartender. Then asking the bartender for Tears of Dawn, one from the 1920s, and the bartender tells him he didn't have any of that. Then the prot tells him to bring him something strong as he had something to do in the morning, so he needed to be drunk outside the bar where the bow was located. We can see the name of it, which is Dew of Dawn. This was the hideout of Blood Fang in the city and the place where they received the missions, which were only delivered and gave a secret password, which was Dawn Dew. Something strong to work in the morning. It had to be said in this order. We return to the present and see how the bartender, when he heard it password in the correct order, he made everyone who was in the park attack the protagonist and then end up on the floor due to a glass that the protagonist threw at him at that moment. This leaves all the bandits very surprised and will be launched to attack the protagonist at that moment. And in an instant, the pro had already killed 3 of them, leaving the rest of the bandits on the site in complete shock. And remembering the proa that in the Mun world, just with a small breathing technique, a person with no skills could easily overcome his limits for a very short period of time. Suddenly, all the bandits rush to attack towards the pro again. After a while, we see how the bartender starts to get up, after being knocked unconscious by the blow the protagonist gave him, and he tells the pro why he was doing this as he watched, as all the bandits were dead and the bar was completely destroyed, to which the pro replies that he himself had caused it. Attacking the former, we change dinners and see how the guards arrive a few minutes later and find all the mess that had already caused the pro, thus discovering the act that only one person had survived. And this was the bartender who was in the second. He tells the guards that the protagonist had headed towards the territory of Law, stating that the main base of Bloodfang was in the aforementioned territory. We go back to the past and see how the protagonist had the bartender on the second floor and was torturing him, showing us how the bartender was missing 2 fingers, and the latter still refused to reveal the location of his boss. The poet tells him that the most loyal people are always those who have the most. He reports, and while looking around, I find a picture of the bartender next to what appeared to be his son, in that we see how he spreads the portrait of these and tells him that he will look for his son and kill him if this one did not say to speak soon. In that, the bartender says that how it was possible that it did not resort to such tricks, to what RP comments that with her of blood he does not fear to lose the life if it is to recover the honor of his organization or to take revenge of Al, and revealing his Bloodfang made many innocent people are now criminals which, unable to pay their debts, are left as slaves for these. The Proton again threatens her and tells her that he will kill her son, slowly mentioning, so this was her last chance. We switch dinners and see how the chief of the Bloodfang bandits, together with a small group of subjects, he was talking about what was happening in the territory of Baron Dimitri, and the chief of these asked how a simple nobleman who was rejected by the Swordsmanship Academy was able to wipe out an entire platoon of his group, thus asking his men what was the current location, Delta, to which one of the bandits mentions that it was leaving the territory of, mentioning, so the pro could have obtained information from one of his men, the Bloodfang chief. After this, he investigated a little more and discovered that the protagonist was alone and tells all his men that the protagonist has been belittling them, stating that they should prepare for the fight and that he will swear that after killing him, he will hang his corpse in the central square of the territory. At the same time, we see how Lawrence from the house was reunited with all his work team, commenting to them that a war would soon break out against the Barco territory, commenting if among all the inevitable guerrillas, and that even Barco received help from the central government to pay for all the battle that was to come. This is questioning whether they should give part of their territory to the Barco family. But Baron Lawrence, he stops everyone and tells them that this is impossible, since all the other territories would rush towards them like hungry hyenas to take away a part of their territory as well. Then he mentions that the only way out of all this was the arranged marriage they had with Dimitri's family, mentioning that even if the Boat family had the support of the central government, this would not, it was richer than the family of the protagonist, revealing that in recent years the family of the protagonist has increased a fortune, thus exceeding the fortune of all the territories that were in the northeast, in which we see how Flora, the ex-fiancée of the protagonist, was behind, questioning if she should tell her father what happened to her marriage. Very nervous. She questioned whether or not she should in. A guard arrives, very upset, trying to enter Baron Lawrence's office to mention that something very important was happening there. At the same moment, we see how the guards of the Lawrence territory open the doors, since the eldest son of the House of Mitri was in danger and was on their land. At the same time, we see how another guard tells the captain of the fortress Lawrence that in the main square, everyone was surprised at what was happening there. We see how the main square of the Lawrence territory, everyone who was there was completely surprised, and we see how a person made his way carrying another person already lifeless, leaving incredible trail of blood on the floor. Who will be the person they are dragging? Well, everything we will discover this and much more in the next chapter. Thank you for watching this video.